Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of AutoCentral, South Africa's #1 motoring podcast. My name is George Mienie, and as usual, joined by none other than Wandile Sishi. How's it going, Wandi?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's another week, George, so I'm super excited to just be talking about cars. My voice is a bit scratchy, but you'll have to forgive me this week. Right.
We'll scratch through it. I see your dogs want to be part of the show, so they're more than welcome. But tell me, what happened to Vrrpha and Hamilton?
A lot of people were actually upset about what happened at the race, but I wasn't. I think that's what happens when you have two fantastic drivers who are racing for the championship. They're not going to give the other the opportunity to take it. Yeah. So
I think it was a racing incident. What do you think? I
agree.
Yeah, I think it was a racing incident.
100%. I didn't expect Hamilton to slow down. I didn't expect Verstappen essentially to just go through the sausage curb and take the time penalty, I guess. And that's what's going to happen. They just have to be a little bit cleverer if they want to have a clean season. And I'm sure they're going to. They're professional, so they won't let this impact the rest of the season, I'm sure.
But this is not the F1 show. But very lastly, how close did that tire of Verstappen's come to Hamilton's head? Did you see that entire top of that car was crushed?
Completely crushed. Yeah, I mean it touched his helmet.
Yeah.
And it's funny because 2 years ago, people, including Hamilton, were like, no to the halo. And now it's saved over 4 drivers in the span of about 2 years. So the cars are getting quicker, so the safety needs to be at that level as well. And I think it's great to see that the drivers walk away with barely a scratch on them now. Exactly.
Good stuff. Well, I mean, today's episode we're calling the manual episode, not the F1 show, the manual episode, and we'll unpack the slow death and maybe reincarnation of the manual transmission. Next, we'll be joined by none other than our motoring journalist, Minnie, to join us and unpack the 2021 VW Golf GTI, which is an iconic vehicle in itself. And then lastly, as usual, we'll be answering some of your motoring-related questions from our Ask AutoTrader platform. So Wandi, what's up with the manual transmission dying? What is your perspective?
I think we'll get into the details. I have my own personal opinion on the manual transmission.
Which
I think
one
it's
do you
very
prefer?
Controversial. I definitely prefer automatic. I won't lie. But I think the manual still has its place in the hearts of many car enthusiasts. But in terms of the roads and the mind of consumers, I can understand why it's slowly seeing this bitter end.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you feel about that. I know EVs don't necessarily have manual or automatic. It's just stop and go.
As I've kind of gone through the years of driving, when I was younger, 18, 19, 20, when I first got my license, like, what automatic? Yeah. Old people drive automatics. That's how I used to believe. Exactly. Old people drive automatics. My mom had an automatic Mazda 626. I don't know if you remember the Mazda 626s. My mom had an automatic Mazda 626. And I was going to take my driving test on this Mazda 626. And then I found out that if you got an automatic license, you weren't allowed to drive manual.
You can't drive manual. Exactly.
And I was like, hell to the no. I mean, today I don't think it matters. I don't think there are enough manuals on the road, right?
Not in South Africa. In South Africa, manuals still rule the roost. We're actually one of the few countries in the world, actually, where you'll see manuals are more popular than automatics. But I think that has more to do with cost than anything else. Because, I know people who are my age, for instance, who don't even have a manual license. They just went straight for the automatic. So, we'll see what happens in the future. But right now, it seems like manuals are a little bit more popular.
Well, I mean, to set the scene, in February 2020, the website Green Car Reports reported that for the first time ever in the United States, not in South Africa, in the United States, electric vehicles outsold manual transmission combustion engine cars. So what does that mean? Manuals made up for 1.1% of 2019's new car sales in the US, while electric vehicles made up 1.6% of sales.
Yeah.
So both admittedly still a very small share of the market, but even electric vehicles have now overtaken the sale of manual transmissions in cars.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's one thing to talk about automatic and manual, but once you use something that's a brand new technology that's outselling something that's been so entrenched in what we think driving is, or the real emotion and, you know, visceral experience of driving a car, then it paints a different story with regards to where the world is going. And it seems like automatic is going to be the norm, specifically now with EVs sort of taking over.
Oh no, definitely with the EVs. I mean, the EVs doesn't have a gearbox, so you don't need a gear stick. But isn't America by and large an automatic country anyway? Because their manual car production peaked in 1980 at 35% and has declined ever since. 1980.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's important when we put on these stats, we actually give some context to the situation. It's always been like that in America. It's kind of an unfair statistic to kind of use as your argument for, you know, what is better.
Manual or automatic.
But if you go everywhere else in the world, it's not as auto bias. Specifically in South Africa, we've seen that, you know, we around 40% or 45% around there being more manual. So, you know, it just kind of depends where you're going. And I think South Africa slowly but surely is also going to start moving in that direction once the price, you know, of the automatic gearbox comes down a little bit.
It's grown, right? Because in 2019, the number of manual gearboxes was 45%, whereas in 2015 it was 33%. So manual gearbox sales, or should I say cars with manual gearbox sales, have grown. But I mean, I do see it coming down over time. So why manual though? Why would people want a manual car, do you think?
So, I mean, okay, I think there's a few factors, and I'm going to start with the one that I consider the biggest lie ever told in cars, which is that manuals are fun. A lot of people believe that, you know, that experience of changing up and down is, you know, it kind of gives you that fast and furious sort of experience when you're driving a vehicle.
Yeah.
Personally, I think just give me the flappy paddle and I'm happy. I'm going to feel exactly the same way. I want to feel like Lewis Hamilton. I don't want to feel like Vin Diesel with my arm, you know, getting big and gymming. No. Just give me that. And I think that's one of the big reasons. In South Africa, they're also less likely to be stolen, which is quite interesting. Some people believe that manual transmission also gives you better control of the vehicle.
Do you think it's because the hijackers don't know how to drive a manual car?
I think it's a lot of things. It's just you don't want to make a mistake. Or it's okay. Look, I'm not a criminal, so I don't know this for fact. But
don't want to make a mistake while you're stealing a car.
Let me just say, I think that it's you know, you don't want to make a mistake stalling, especially I would assume
if it's a
criminals
getaway
are a bit younger now, so they would want to, you know, quick getaway.
Stop digging, Wandile. Stop digging. So, or is it a control thing? You know, a lot of people that I've spoken to that love manual cars love the effect of control. So they feel like it's a real driving experience. You're in control of everything. The car's not making any decisions for you. You know, how much of a control thing do you think it is?
Let me ask you, George, do you want to be like, what sort of control, what more control do people really want in the driving experience? I feel like we have it, or like you're already controlling the vehicle. What more do you want? Like, what more do you actually want?
Well, you know, so let me put it to you this way. As time has gone on, cars have become more autonomous. Even moving from manual to automatic is kind of an autonomy step. The car is doing the work for you. Whereas if you think about back in, you know, even the starter motor. So in my mind, like having the key to turn the ignition and to start the car, that's an autonomous move. Because if you think about back in the early 1900s, how did you start a car before the starter motor?
Okay, let me give you another scenario that might change.
Well, let me tell you how this car was started. You had to go and stick this crank in the front of the car and turn it in order for the car to start. And that was a manual way to start the car. So over 100 years, this autonomy thing has become the way in which cars are going. And manual to automatic gearboxes is no different. What is your story?
So here's my look. I speak on behalf of industry and, you know, consumer behavior. I think I'm definitely somebody who pays more attention to that. And if you ask the OEM and you ask just the everyday consumer, what they want is something that's a bit safer, that's gonna make sure that they get there easier with the least amount of work. And I think that's why the automatic has become so popular. Is one, it's safer. You don't have to do that extra step. And two, you're less likely to make a mistake, which might end somebody else's life or yourself. Look, I'm not saying that manuals cause deaths or anything, but it's more of the human experience that has an effect on the overall driving experience, not just for yourself, but everybody else. And I think automatics tick a lot of those boxes. Yes, it's not going to be, the same amount of control, but I think very few people will want control over a safer, easier drive. If that makes sense.
Well, I mean, let's turn to cost in that case. So I agree with you. On the one hand, it's control. On the other hand, it's kind of ease of driving, relaxed driving. What about cost? Because the complexity of automatic gearboxes up to now meant that manual versions of the car were cheaper. How much do you think that played into people taking up manuals in South Africa rather than automatics? Is it because of the low cost of the manual, or do you think it was? I mean, I think cost plays a big part in everything.
I used to think so, but I think of it now as it's a premium. A lot of people are okay with driving manual. It's really a preference thing. But if you have that extra amount of money, why not go automatic? And most people do. There's somebody who's very close to me who's going through that exact experience right now. They're buying a new car. It's cheaper for them to get the manual version. But they've been driving a manual their whole life, and they're just like, no. I'm not going to be in traffic again going through that experience. So, I used to think it's mostly a cost thing, but I think it's more of, do I want to have the shiny wheel or just the base, which still does the same thing? If you have the extra money, go for it. If not, I think a lot of South Africans specifically are just like, hey, I don't mind just getting the manual and saving a little bit of extra money.
So in terms of performance, manual cars are quicker than automatics, and there's one particular reason, and it's not because of gear shift time. As a matter of fact, manual gearboxes are probably shift quicker than a human can, but manual gearboxes are lighter than automatic gearboxes. It makes the overall car lighter than automatic gearboxes. And one of the big reasons sports car owners prefer the manual gearbox is because of the weight.
Yeah, no, I can totally believe that. Weight is such a huge factor in making cars that much faster. In making cars that much faster. So I can understand why, someone who is either building a supercar or interested in buying a supercar would go for a manual. Also, it goes back to that idea of control, fun factor. That's where I think manuals sort of, are still very, very important and have their place, is when you're going to use a vehicle, not just for an everyday experience, but rather for a very visceral, connected automobile fun experience. That's where manuals really, really tick all the boxes.
Well, then you've got to kind of take out that crankshaft and take your starter motor out and go and start your car from the nose of the car manually, right? Because it's the same bloody argument. What about traffic? Like the one thing I love about manual cars or driving a manual car is when there's no traffic. Then it's fun to drive a manual car. And I would agree, that whole kind of experience of controlling when the gear shift happens, at what rev range, and not letting the car do it for you. But most of us don't drive cars mostly in those conditions. We mostly drive cars in traffic, and it's a bloody big effort to change gears all the time in traffic. Pull that clutch out. You get out of the car and your left leg is kind of grown because you've been working out all the time.
Exactly. Like I said, I know somebody who's going through the exact same thing, and the main reason why they're going for an automatic is because of traffic. They just don't want to have to go through, I want to say the trauma of the clutch and the shifting gears every 2 seconds. Why do that when you can just relax and enjoy your experience? But once again, traffic doesn't happen all the time. In
lockdown not, but pretty much traffic was an everyday thing before lockdown.
Yeah. I think you have to weigh these pros and cons and see what works best for you. For South Africans, for some reason, it's still, we'll see what happens. But I think what's going to change that in South Africa is the fact that a lot of OEMs may be actually, making the decision for us.
Well, Jaguar and Land Rover, as a matter of fact, have totally phased out manual transmissions. You won't find a Land Rover or a Jaguar, for that matter, off the floor new now with a manual gearbox, right?
100%. And they're not the only ones. We saw recently VW just made an announcement saying that they gradually just eliminating the manual gearbox. Mercedes-Benz is doing the exact same thing because ultimately they need funding for the EVs that are coming out now, and why not take out, I guess, the option that most people aren't necessarily going for globally, which makes sense.
Well, going for globally, but not locally. So the next generation Tiguan and Passat models in 2023 will be manual gearboxes will be totally eliminated, and VW says by 2030 VW will no longer launch new models with manual options in key markets such as Europe, China, and the USA. So. It begs the question, with the electric vehicles in the future, do we really need manual gearboxes anymore?
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate this again. As I think during this conversation, I've had a little bit of a change of heart. It's not that I don't necessarily like manual gearboxes or the transmission. I think they have their place. And for someone who wants to have that experience, specifically in a more high-end, sportier car, it makes a lot of sense. But with EVs coming along, I don't think they're going to be necessary. We know now we do have EVs, and they're just one gear that you kind of use all the time. You don't need a manual, so we'll see what happens. But I can't see the manual having a reincarnation or surviving the future of motoring.
Oh no, that's definitely not going to happen. Definitely not going to happen. Well, I don't know if you saw Mick Schumacher drive his dad's car. His dad's, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, from the time of recording this, where he drove the Benetton? The Benetton, the car that Michael Schumacher first won. I think it was his first world championship was the Benetton, and Mick Schumacher got into that car, and I wonder how much learning he had to do to operate that car, because it was fully manual, right?
Well, I think, because he's a racing driver himself, he's had to drive manuals in one form or another. So I don't think the learning curve was that huge. However, the older F1 cars were a lot more difficult to drive than the ones we currently have now. So I think it's not just the changing of the gears which he had to deal with, but it's the entire experience that he had to grapple with.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. Same thing with normal cars. It's just easier to have an automatic if you just everyday driving. Well, I mean, in saying that, let's bring in our expert journalist Lawrence Minnie to take a look at the 2021 VW Golf GTI, because the Golf GTI has long had a manual gearbox and then moved to DSG and then etc. 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 Welcome, Lawrence.
Howdy do, George. Always welcome to be back with you guys.
Yes, it's nice to have you. Yeah, so tell us, Lawrence, we've been talking about manual versus automatic gearboxes. Let's first take a quick straw poll. What is your preference?
Well, it all depends on what I'm doing. If I'm driving a performance car, I want a manual. That's just the way things go. But if I'm doing the school run, running around town, dropping the kids off on my way to the office, sitting in traffic, it's an auto every day of the week.
Well, that just proves the traffic thing, right? So chances are you're going to be wanting to drive a manual maybe 10% of the time.
Well, yeah, and only in specific cars.
And it depends on the car, yeah.
High-end sports car type thing. So tell us about the 2021 VW Golf GTI. Give us a little bit of a history of the gearbox first of the Golf GTI before we get into this particular car.
So it was manual. They started offering autos in the 90s. The auto then gave way to the DSG, as we know it in the 6, 7, 7.5, and 8. A lot of people don't know, but the South African name that we gave to the car, Vrrpha, is actually because of the DSG. It's what makes the Golf, really.
The DSG?
The latest generation.
Or the Vrrpha?
Yeah, the DSG. The latest generation actually doesn't come with a manual. You can't get a manual at all. Oh. So very unfortunate for those who enjoy rowing their own. But
is that globally you can't get a manual, or is it just the ones that are coming to Africa?
Just here. I think, if I'm not, and I speak under correction, I think you might be able to get one in Europe. But on the whole, the motor manufacturers just saying, there's no point in us making an entire range of cars with manual gearboxes that nobody's going to buy because everybody wants auto. And remember, our local market is just a drop in the ocean compared to the rest of the world, who really are the ones that are dictating what car gets what kind of gearbox.
Yeah, that's so true. So, so this is the latest iteration of this legendary car, and South Africans love the Golf GTI, and it's arrived in South Africa. You've driven it. What are your first impressions? It's called a Golf 8, right?
It's the 8th generation of the GTI. So it's a GTI, but we don't call it the GTI 8. It's just the GTI.
I'm glad you picked that up because it's a very, very little known fact that VW didn't actually come out with Golf 5, 6, 7, 8. It's just the generational term for the car, right? It's all Golf GTIs.
Yeah, exactly. So the way you tell people which generation you have is by saying, no, it's the 7 or the 7.5 or the 8. Long history. The car's been around since the early 80s. And, my personal opinion, this new one, which we initially thought was going to be VW's swan song for the petrol GTI. As it turns out, South Africa might be seeing a 9, possibly even a 10 before they go full electric. So there is hope for our GTI lovers locally. The vehicle, to me personally, not that much different from the 7.5 in terms of the mechanics, the drive, the touch and feel and everything. The biggest change, though, of course, a little bit of cosmetics on the outside, but the biggest stuff is on the inside. And that's probably, I think you're going to find two opposing forces happening there. There's going to be people that love it and, like myself, not so much a fan.
I have one question, Lawrence. There's a specific reason why the Golf GTI is so popular in South Africa. It's the most popular variant that's searched for. Everyone wants a GTI.
Except for one day.
And I think it's, except for me, I think for many different reasons. Are those reasons carried over onto this 8th generation GTI? Because I think that's going to determine if this brand that's become so synonymous with South African cars and our culture as people of South Africa, does this car tick those boxes, or are we seeing a decline in its popularity?
It does tick the boxes. It is a GTI. It's still a GTI, and South Africans will buy a GTI no matter what it is, a GTI. So, it doesn't really matter what I say about the vehicle. There will still be people who will fill the order books, and we can see it already in the sales figures. They're all sold. And the ones that are coming on the ship are sold. And the ones that are coming on the ship after that are sold. So, yes, it does embody everything that is a GTI. It's a little bit watered down now in the 8th generation. So the DSG fart, the Vrrpha, so to speak, is a little bit watered down. It's not as aggressive as it used to be. What I was saying about the interior,
it's trying to be an EV, right?
Yeah, VW has moved away from switches. So there's no more manual analog switches in the car. Everything is this haptic touch feedback, and it is infuriating to use.
Why?
So because it doesn't click. So, you don't know if you're actually switching something on or off. Placement of the switches is also highly debatable. The car comes with a steering wheel heater as standard, and the on-off button is on the steering wheel where your thumb rests. So you're constantly switching the steering wheel heater on. Silly things like that. The button to open the sunroof is haptic, so you have to slide your finger along the roof. It looks like you're caressing the inside of your car. It's a bit weird. But, yeah, I did, when I first drove the car a few weeks back, I had a very, very high score in mind. Because of the fact that the GTI is such an awesome all-rounder. It's a great performance car. It's a great city car. It's a great handling car, which makes it a very, very good driver's car. But since then, the GR Yaris has come out, and I've had to revise my score because, unfortunately, the Golf doesn't tick as many boxes that GR Yaris does. And the price is pretty much the same. So this new 8th gen GTI, you're looking at about 669,000 without any of the options. and the GR Yaris is 700 with all the options. So
yeah, but GTI is still GTI, right? I mean,
it's a GTI, and you know the review that myself and Sean did a few days back. I'm busy wrapping up the video now. He said it as plainly as you can say. It doesn't really matter what we say. We can complain all we want about the car, or if you've got a 7.5, keep it. Is it worth upgrading to the 8? Don't really think so. But if you're in like a Polo, definitely have a look at the 8. You can't go wrong. You won't regret it. But it doesn't matter what we say, because GDI is a GDI and it's going to sell.
Exactly. So, you might have GTI haters because it's so popular. It's like you've got Apple iPhone or Apple haters because it's so popular, and those people, is there a jealousy factor there? Maybe they won't drive the GTI just because it's so popular, which I think is a silly way to look at it, to be honest. You've got to really look at the car for itself rather than kind of doing things for other people, doing stupid things for other people. So you're saying that this car retails for what is the base price there, Lawrence?
669,500, and then you can add on the black package, the IQ lighting, the Harman Kardon system, and that'll jack the price up to 710, 715 in a heartbeat.
Okay, so you can put 100 grand on the car quite easily.
Yeah, I would just like to say though that I think we should also be happy that VW is still making the GTI. If you look at our local market, there's no more Focus ST. There's no more Megane RS. The Honda Type R is nowhere to be found. There are no more performance hatchbacks.
Well,
so the
pocket rockets or boy racer cars.
Yeah, I mean, they're still around, but they're like 2 million rand. It's not really the same thing anymore.
So Lawrence, sorry, Wandie, go for it. I see your garden guys are there. Good stuff. Hope they're doing a good job. What is your score out of 10, Lawrence?
Well, when I initially spoke to Wandie about the car, I'd given it a 9, but I'm going to revise that down to an 8.5 because the Yaris has given it a swift kick in the pants and knocked it down half a point. 8.5.
8.5. What else do we have in 8.5 range there, Wandie?
So there's definitely a few vehicles which have touched the 8.5 area. Let's see, we have the 4 Series, which did around the same thing, the 330 IS, which was the South African special. Basically those 3 vehicles. So it's kind of tight, and I think 8.5 is a really good score. We haven't had the GR Yaris yet, so we'll see where that goes.
Oh, it's coming.
Well, there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Our very own expert motoring journalist, Lawrence Mienie, on the 2021 VW Golf GTI. And if you want to go and have a look at all the things, news and reviews about many cars besides this GTI hitting autotrader.co.za in the coming days, go along to our news and reviews platform and go and read up about the car you're about to buy. Go and see if it suits your fancy. Each of our expert motoring journalists obviously have their own opinions, and we allow them to have those opinions. So go and watch a lot of material and go and research as much as you can and get many points of view and see whether this Golf 8 GTI actually suits you for the future. So thank you very much, Lawrence. Really nice to have you on the show again, and we'll see you next time.
Always a pleasure, James. Keep well.
Ciao.
Thanks, Lawrence.
All right. Well, there we have it, Wandie. Would you buy the Golf 8 GTI?
It doesn't matter what I want. South Africa wants the car. They love it. 8.5 it's exactly where it should be, I think. I've never driven it, but yeah, it's a GTI.
Oh, you know what? When I was younger, I loved the GTI. Not that I don't like it now. It's just I'm into EVs. But I still think a GTI is a GTI, to be honest. It's always going to be a loved car. They just need to turn it electric and, I don't know what they're going to call it. I suppose they've got the.
Well, I mean,
You're on mute.
We had the e-Golf actually on the show, so
e-Golf's.
Maybe it'll be the e-Golf GT.
Nah, e-Golf. That's a retrofitted car. It's terrible. They mustn't retrofit cars. It doesn't work, in my opinion. Anyway, let's move on before we get down like the windy road. Ask AutoTrader. Every day people send AutoTrader motoring related questions, all things car buying and selling. And so Wendy and I will now attempt to answer some of these burning questions. So Wendy, what's the first question?
Okay, first question comes from Joram, who's asked, when you buy a 1-year-old car from a dealership, does the remaining warranty and service plan carry over? Really good question.
Really good question, Joram. Generally speaking, a car's original service plan and warranty coverage should carry through to the next owner without there being any need for additional warranty or service plan extension. The only requirement is that the car should pass the quality check at the dealership for that specific brand, and you know, in your case, Suzuki. So just follow up with the manufacturer. They should have the car in their database and make sure that quality check is done.
Okay. Next question comes from Pete, who's asked, where can I buy or download a 2009 Toyota Rush owner's manual? So I'm assuming Pete just lost their manual and they're trying to get a digital version.
Well, Pete, the car you're referring to, the 2009 Toyota Rush, was sold in South Africa as a Daihatsu Terios. But with that in mind, I don't know if you remember the Daihatsu Terios one day. I thought it was a pretty cool car. With that in mind, we don't have any idea actually where you could find the owner's manual. Perhaps Daihatsu or Toyota breaker yards, maybe spare shops might be able to help you. You know, go off to one of them and go and ask for the whether they've got the manual or not. I mean, surely I would imagine that some repair shops might have manuals at hand. Even if you could, you know, maybe go and take a look in their presence if there's something specific you want to address on the Toyota Rush.
Yeah, I think I had a similar scenario. Well, I have a friend who had a similar scenario with a different OEM. They just went to the OEM and they got one sent through from overseas. It just costs a little bit, but if you really, really need it, you can get them to reprint it for you.
Exactly.
Last question comes from Oratile, who's asked, when buying from a private seller, what's the seller's role and the buyer's role? Any recommended steps?
Well, Oratile, private car sales work somewhat differently to dealership sales, and many of the sellers' legal obligations are lifted, like the Voetstoots kind of scenario. And there's only two things required of the seller, and that is to sign the change of ownership documents and to hand over the keys and the NATIS registration documents. Those are the two obligations. Following that, the seller is free to remove the vehicle from their name and the NATIS database, and to ensure that future fines or licensing fees won't reflect on their name. So if the seller is feeling generous, they might arrange a roadworthy. They don't have to, and supply that along with the registration document, but it's not obligatory. There's a lot fewer things that a private seller has to do. So if I was buying a car privately, Oratello, I would insist that the seller provide a roadworthy certificate or at least some sort of check on the car, because if you don't get into there's no real recourse.
Yeah, and then I think as a buyer, don't you have to tell them that you're selling the car as is or something like that?
Yes. So when selling a car privately and you are selling, make sure that you make sure that it's mentioned that a car is being sold Voetstoots. The best thing is to have a sale agreement, and in that sale agreement mention that the car is sold as is, or in the traditional words, Voetstoots. And on that note, that has been epic, Wandile Sishi. I hope your man does better next time, but we will see you next time on another episode of AutoCentral. Cheers for now.